Hello everyone, I hope you're all well and that you had a nice weekend. Now today in English, we're starting a new story, okay? And this time, we're going to change it up a little bit. We're not going to do a text from Purple Mash, but we're going to do a text which is one of our core texts that we have in school, okay? So, this story is called Ice Trap, Shackleton's Incredible Expedition. Now, Shackleton, he was an Antarctic explorer, and he went on this incredible expedition, which is basically a journey. Expedition is another word for a journey. So, boys and girls, I'm going to read the first half of the story for you, which is all you're going to be focusing on today for your work. All right? And in the next couple of days, we will read the second half of the story. Right, so Ice Trap, Shackleton's Incredible Expedition by Meredith Hooper and N.P. Robertson. Right. Stowaway, stowaway. The locker lid crashed back and Percy Blackborough staggered out into the bitter air. For 3 days he'd crouched inside the dark locker under piles of clothes, while the ship pitched through the ocean. Now he felt so seasick and hungry, he didn't mind being discovered. Suddenly, Sir Ernest Shackleton was standing above him, roaring his anger. "Do you know," bellowed Shackleton, "that on these expeditions we often get very hungry, and if there is a stowaway available, he's the first to be eaten?" Percy looked up. Shackleton was a heavy, powerfully built man. "They'd get a lot more meat off you, sir," he said. Shackleton turned away to hide a grin. "Off to the cook for some food," he said. "Then we'll sign you on." So 19-year-old Percy Blackborough became the youngest member of Sir Ernest Shackleton's Great Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. Shackleton wanted to be the first to walk across the Antarctic continent, 1,800 miles from coast to coast. No one even knew the actual shape of this awesome ice-covered land at the bottom of the world. But before that, Shackleton had to get his wooden ship Endurance through the thickest, most dangerous pack ice in Antarctica. Endurance entered the pack ice in high summer. The floes glittered like endless ice-white fields. Week after week, the ship worked south, weaving and charging through the vast jigsaw of ice, finding open patches of indigo blue sea, dodging icebergs. Shackleton wanted to get his men ashore as far south as possible, with all their gear and their excited sledging dogs. One more day's good sailing should do it. Pieces of ice crowded around the ship, so they stopped and waited. Pack ice is always on the move, shoving together, then loosening up as the pieces drift and shift. But now a gale began, packing the ice tighter. Before anyone realized what was happening, the ice had hardened around Endurance like cement. She was stuck fast, glued into a vast, thick floe. "Frozen in," said the captain, Frank Worsley, "like a nut in a chocolate bar." The ice drifted, carrying Endurance with it. The men could see land in the distance. but they were powerless to go where they wanted. Endurance began to drift away from the coast they had striven so hard to reach back towards the north. The temperature plummeted. Summer was nearly over. A new journey had begun, unplanned, unwanted. Winter came with fearful cold and dreadful darkness. The sun did not rise for 79 days. The dogs curled up out on the floe in dog-loos made of ice blocks. Inside the warm ship, the men argued about what was happening in the rest of the world and when they would break free from their lonely prison. They played cards and practical jokes and were bored. Outside, the silence was eerie, but every now and then ominous moans and clashes in the distance told of huge ice floes grinding together, neither giving way, massive blocks of rock-hard ice heaving up in jumbled piles. One night, when the wind howled in the rigging, Shackleton talked to Frank Worsley. "The ship can't live in this," he said. "It's only a matter of time." He paced restlessly in his tiny cabin. What the ice gets, the ice keeps. Worsley couldn't bring himself to believe it. In any case, they said nothing to the others. Cheerfulness, optimism, that's what mattered. The ice would release its grip. Endurance would escape. Late in the winter, the floe-trapping Endurance broke during a storm. All around, the ice heaped up in confused ridges, like giant wrinkled skin. The pieces ground together again, squeezing the ship. Endurance was heaved high, thrown on one side, then righted herself. But bit by bit, her strong, thick timbers buckled, bent, then splintered and cracked under the terrible roaring pressure. Day after day, the ship groaned like a living thing. The dogs howled, the men watched, helpless. The end came suddenly one afternoon. Giant fingers of ice forced themselves through the ship's sides. Freezing black water poured into the hold and cabins. Like some terrible animal, the ice fingers held the ship, stopping her sinking. The men tumbled out onto the floe. Their home had gone. Watching their ship die was shocking. Shackleton looked around at his men's tired, anxious faces. Their safety was all that mattered now. They must believe that they would survive. Ship and stores have gone, said Shackleton. So now we'll go home. The nearest land was hundreds of miles away, or hundreds of miles across the pack ice. No one lived there, or ever had. But Shackleton ordered everyone to start marching, dragging the heavy lifeboats across the tortuous ice surface. The first day they managed less than a mile. The second and third days they travelled 3/4 of a mile. It was no use. They would have to set up camp. A thick, flat floe was chosen for a campsite. Men walked back to the twisted, broken ship and salvaged what they could. Life on the floe wasn't bad. The cook served breakfast at 8 o'clock, and they sat in their tents and ate fried seal or tinned fish or porridge with lumps of baked dough and tea. For supper, they had penguin stew and cocoa. Spring had come, so there were plenty of seals and penguins to eat. Late one afternoon, Endurance suddenly upended and sank beneath the ice. They felt very lonely now. The floe they were camping on seemed solid, but it was really just a giant floating raft, drifting ever northwards. Underneath their feet lay 12,000 feet of deep, dark ocean. Shackleton paced the floe as it drifted in zigzags north. Summer was almost over. The last of the dogs were shot. There wasn't enough food for them. The men sat in their ragged, dirty clothes, fidgety, anxious, watching Shackleton. Their lives depended on his decisions. At the northern edge of the pack ice, the ocean swell bashed at the ice floes, breaking them up. Their floe was drifting ever closer to this treacherous border between ice and open ocean. They would have to take to the lifeboats. Their floe heaved and tilted in the ocean swell. Bits broke off. Shackleton ordered everyone to sleep fully clothed, with boots on, ready to be out of the tents in 30 seconds. Only absolute necessities could be taken in the boats, but each man still kept hidden his own carefully hoarded treasures, a photograph or a Bible or a tube of toothpaste. The floe split through the camp. It split again. All around them, the ice crashed and lurched. Shackleton watched, waiting for a lead, a gap of clear water. Suddenly it came. The boats were launched. The men scrambled in and bent to the oars. They had been trapped in the ice prison for 15 months. But the ocean was a much more dangerous, frightening enemy. Their small boats could easily be crushed between jolting, grinding floes. Out in the ocean, overloaded and open, they could easily be swamped. By the 6th day of their voyage, they were desperate with lack of sleep and hunger. They could hardly speak for thirst. Their skin erupted with sea water boils. They were weak with diarrhea. Spray shipped from heavy seas froze as it fell on their bitterly cold, frost-bitten, soaking bodies. Shackleton feared that some of his men would not survive. Ahead they could see the high mountains and white glaciers of Elephant Island, rising bleak and grand out of the wild ocean. Late in the afternoon, a gale blew up with a dangerous lumpy sea. They feared being swept in the snowstorms and shrieking wind past the island and beyond all hope. But at dawn, the land lay straight ahead. A narrow beach was glimpsed, backed by black cliffs. Riding the surf, they managed to bring all 3 boats ashore between jagged rocks. Now, children, that's the first half of the story. And there is a lot of new words there, so make sure you read over the text yourself a couple of times before you complete your work. Okay, and try and make sense of it and understand it. So I've set this text as a to-do for you to read as well. Then I want you to complete the dictionary work task. So some of the new words, right, from the story, I want you to look up their meanings and write them in your own words. Once you've that done, I want you to answer the comprehension questions on this half of the story. So remember, we're just reading the first half today. So this is all the first half of the story. And this is all you're going to be focusing on. Okay? So, best of luck, children. I'm looking forward to seeing your work. Bye for now.